start with this one right here. And this is at scanning power. This is the esophagus, and this is the lining of the lumen here. So you see the cellularity of our epithelial tissue. Okay? What tissue type do you think this is? Loose connective tissue, or at least connective tissue. It is getting more fibrous as we get deeper. Okay? And we have some structures here. Anybody venture a guess as to what they are?
Glands.
Those are glands. And we keep going deep. Excuse me. Thank you. We have a little separation here. That's a slide artifact. And then we get into a different layer over here, a different tissue type, muscle. Okay? And then we have some more connective tissue. So let's go back and look at a power where we can see a little more detail. And that would be right here. Okay? So can you recognize this type of epithelium? What is it? Stratified squamous epithelium, wet or non-keratinized. Okay? So that's the first thing. Now, if I were to ask you to name the main layer, what main layer from this list over here does this tissue belong to? The main layer.
Mucosa.
This is epithelium. It's the mucosa. This stratified squamous epithelial wet belongs to the tunica mucosa, as does some loose connective tissue below and a muscularis mucosa. But on this particular slide, the muscularis mucosa is not well developed. Okay, we're high in the esophagus, we're very proximal. So it's hard to see the differentiation between the loose and the dense connective tissue. It gets dense pretty fast, it's hard to pick up the muscle layer. So I won't ask that here, okay? But we are getting into the submucosa here, and that's a main layer name, the tunica submucosa, and we have these structures in the submucosa, okay? These are called esophageal glands. And you can tell they're pretty much goblet cells. These glands are producing mucus to lubricate the swallowed food. Notably, these glands are found exclusively in the proximal or upper esophagus, because why would you keep adding mucus if it was time to enter the stomach? So the mucus is entered just distal to the pharynx in the upper esophagus, right where you're starting the swallowing. As we go deep to that, we get into the muscularis externa. Now, I heard smooth muscle, yes?
Can we go back to, what was the name of the gland?
Esophageal glands. So, do you have your lab study guide? We're looking under esophagus, and everything's listed that's unique regionally here, and then any of the layer names and sublayers above. Okay, so we go deep to the submucosa. We've picked up muscle. Now, I heard somebody say smooth muscle, but let's look up close. At this muscle tissue. What do you see here? And let's go over it. That's just a short oblique section. Let's try to find. Can you see striations? So this is striated muscle. So what muscle tissue type is this?
Skeletal.
This is skeletal muscle. Okay, so the muscularis externa is skeletal muscle tissue. So are we in the upper proximal esophagus or are we in the distal? We're in the proximal esophagus, also known as the upper esophagus, yes.
So if it has the glands, does that mean that it's in the upper and it'll have skeletal muscle, or do they
Yes, yes. So, and I didn't write that on here, but the glands are also, we're gonna find the glands associated with the skeletal muscle, and that's the upper third, okay? And then, and we do have a differentiation between one muscle layer and another one here. It's not as discrete as we're gonna see later on. So I'll talk more about that, but I probably wouldn't ask you circular versus longitudinal layer here, but we do see where that transition is. And we get external, and we just have some fibrous connective tissue which has been disrupted. So it's been pulled apart, looks loose, but it was really very fibrous, but there's no epithelial edge. So this is adventitia, okay? So I'm gonna go back and look for another section, Gesundheit. Let's look here. We're on the same slide, so we're in the same organ. There's our mucosal epithelium of stratified squamous epithelium wet. And I'm going to go to lower power. I think if I'm remembering what we're going to see. Yeah. So here is our lamina propria. And here is what has now developed into a pretty continuous layer of muscularis mucosae. Okay. So from here to here is the tunica mucosa. Okay. So at the upper end of the esophagus, we did not have that distinct of a lower edge to the lamina propria. Now as we get deep to the lamina propria, deep to the mucosa, we're in the submucosa. And we've got a lot of disruption here. This is looking like a tighter woven connective tissue than this. And so that just indicates there's been disruption. But as we look, there's no glands. Okay, that's a blood vessel up there. No glands. And then we get deep to the submucosa, and we're in the muscularis externa. And we have an inner circular layer, an outer longitudinal layer, and let's go up in power and see if we can recognize that tissue type. Okay, so we're at low power here. Would you call this skeletal muscle tissue? No, the fibers are so much smaller, and the nuclei are, really flattened, kind of torpedo shaped. So what muscle tissue type is it? Smooth muscle, okay? And this is the inner circular layer. And this is interesting. As we go to this outer longitudinal layer, I'm going to take you up to a higher power. I found